Dr. Ildar Khannanov, who will be speaking to us from the Peabody Institute in Baltimore. And you'll be talking to us about the Rameau and the sciences, which we're all very interested to hear about.
Thank you very much. In history of music theory, the figure of Jean-Philippe Rameau stands out as one of the most radical, pioneering, and provocative. It has been such for his contemporaries and generations that immediately followed it. It remains such for many theorists today globally. He took an unprecedented direction in his musical studies, an alliance with natural sciences. The tradition preceding Rameau, that of the figured bass, was a kind of pragmatic compendium of recommendations for the organist apprentices. The method of partimento was based upon the series of patterns and blocks for memorization and performance. None of this would have the courage to step outside the narrow borders of music making as a craft. The great musical thinkers of the distant past, such as Boethius, Tinctoris, Zarlino, had close ties with philosophy and theology of their times, but their scientific references had nothing to compare with the new scientific world of the Enlightenment. Rameau was alone in his passion. Even his countrymen colleagues such as Charles-Simon Catel, the first professor of music theory at Conservatory in Paris, and François-Joseph Ficci's famous Belgian-French theorist, did not embrace his intentions. They were critical of his excursions into natural sciences and considered the union of science and music unartistic. This is a formula for major and minor triad. It first was introduced in Zarlino and then picked up by Rameau and developed by Riemann, and my teacher Yuri Holopov quoted in his book. I studied in Soviet Union, and they were all Zarlino, Rameau, Riemann oriented theorists. Look how elegant is this. Pretty much we're using here arithmetic and harmonic progressions. In particular, 6, 5, 2, 4 describes minor triad, and 15, 12, and 10 describes major triad. Major third, bottom. So, and these are proportional relationship. Maybe this mathematics is not perfect, but it could be a weak point of Rameau's discovery, but in fact, it is an ancient category that comes from the Middle Ages. The arithmetic and harmonic proportions were used for description of division of the fifth by the third in Giuseppe Zarlino's opus magnum, Le Instituzioni Harmoniche, in the middle of the 16th century. Well, if we skip this criticism, we'll discover positive aspects of theory of Rameau. Rameau lived at the time when modernity introduced a cluster of fundamental concepts. There's a list. The discovery of mathematical formulation of the natural overtone series by Thomas Pigot, Joseph Saveur, Marine Marsan. Very important. Aristotle didn't understand music at all. At the end of the 17th century, they discovered natural overtone series. Consequent debates of the string, namely mathematical explanation of the vibrating string, D'Alembert, Euler, Bernoulli, Lagrange, these are great names. They all communicated on this. There was no Facebook, but they had a round table on what is the string. Then what is very important, the theory of functions. Rameau and Riemann famous for introducing a theory of tonal harmonic functions. And we also have formal functions, we have metric functions. The word function permeated music theory since Rameau. I wondered when and who introduced the word function into mathematics. Oh, it happened to be Leibniz and Bernoulli in their later exchange in 1795, introduced the concept of function. It didn't exist before. Mathematical description of movement, the theory of infinitesimals of Leibniz, the inverted infinity, iteration, constant approximation, the theory of optics, Descartes, dynamics, physics, dynamics, Newton. Another thing, another discovery, differential calculus, started by Pierre Fermat, Christian Huygens, Blaise Pascal, John Wallace, and fully developed by Leibniz. Very important for music study, for acoustics, for harmony, voice reading, for all these topics. Leonhard Euler's theory of number, differential geometry, mathematical physics, approximation calculus, and music theory. Introduction of the idea of mathematical topology, which is analysis situs, by Euler, in his famous analysis of 7 bridges of Königsberg. But that's not all. Carolus Linnaeus introduced classification and hierarchy of plants and animals. It's amazing. And finally, the last but not the least, theory of language. John Locke, Etienne Bonneau de Condillac, Antoine Arnaud, and Pierre Nicole, grammar of Port-Royal. Add to that Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This is the context in which Rameau's theory existed, at least 9 points. I have to tell you that due to Schenkerian bias, all these things were kind of downplayed. If you read Thomas Christensen's book, half of it is dedicated to the proof that British Academy of Science was better than French Academy of Science. And it's very difficult to read. It's charged. There's too much of a bias when North American theorists discuss this, because it's continental and they're constantly in competition with that. I understand that. I am bystander. I'm neither nor. So I've chosen this position between Soviet Union, Russia, Germany, France, and the United States. I'm just the observer. Please don't shoot at the pianist, as they say. I decided to choose the method of circumstantial evidence, analysis of circumstantial evidence. Of course, I cannot find direct references in Rameau's text to Linné or to grammar of Port-Royal, but it was in the air. You cannot neglect that when you do something. It can be done on subconscious level, but definitely there must be correlation between these great achievements in sciences and what he has done. So let's list very quickly. What Rameau introduced, innovative, revolutionary, the idea of chord, l'accord parfait, as an independent element of harmony. Next, the idea of the root of the chord, le racine, which defines all these inversions, was done for the first time by Rameau, and nobody understands where did he get it from. It was not present in previous tradition. The idea of classification and hierarchy of triads and their inversions, as well the hierarchy of primary triads and secondary triads, was not done by anybody before Rameau. The idea of harmonic functions of the chords had names: tonique, sous-dominant, dominant-tonique, is presented in the Génération harmonique in the treatise of 1837. The discovery of leading tone. What can be more important for our contemporary understanding of harmony than the leading tone? Scale step 7 with moving to L8. The idea of fundamental bass, that is the succession of the roots of the chords. And finally, but the idea of natural laws of music related to le corps sonore. This is philosophical. It's a generalization. So everything is related to the body, corporeality. These discoveries are very, very contemporary. Gilles Deleuze and Jacques Derrida would be very happy to read this if they were interested at least a bit in this. So let me go point by point very quickly. Le chord parfait. First, the chord. Let me just go through that. The idea of chord. The chord as an independent functional element of music syntax. The theoretical ground for this discovery was laid by Zarlino. The idea of a perfect chord was exhaustively formulated by Rameau. Perfection of the perfect chord is a separate issue related to philosophy and theology. The very fact that Rameau provided the definition of the chord as an independent and high-level musical structure adds the laurels into the wreath of honor, his wreath of honor. It took 2,000 years from realization of tone and interval, or tonos and systema by Greeks, then 150 years since Greeks until Zarlino to get the middle note into the fifth, and finally in 1722 The 1722 marked the realization of triad as a perfect sonority that crowns the hierarchy of other musical elements. The idea of the root of the chord that defines all its inversions has met significant resistance from supporters of figured bass, and even today there are some voices against the use of this innovation. What is the meaning and the value of this discovery? The chordo in Zarlino and Dreiklang in German figured bass terminology has been developing as a category throughout the centuries of history of polyphony. It is difficult for a musician of the 21st century to imagine that there had been a time when the root of the triad has not been recognized. Without the root, the triad remains a kind of concatenation of the note heads, a pure graphic structure. It manifests no tendency for development or movement of any kind. It lacks identity, especially in oral space. Attuning the ear for hearing the roots of the chords allows to navigate the oral space and the chord progression. A trained ear can understand the value of each chord, say C major triad or triad on scale step 4, and anticipate the further steps in harmonic progression. Without the knowledge of the roots of the chords, building meaningful and syntactically solid harmonic progression is impossible. And without the roots, we could not have built a theory of musical forms, 18th century form and lyra. The next, the idea of classification and hierarchy of triads. That's very interesting. For the first time in history of music theory, Rameau introduced the idea of classification and hierarchy of triads. And here again, we must look around in the scientific world for the precedent. It is found in groundbreaking discovery of classification of plants and animals by Carolus Linnaeus. His ideas exerted unprecedented influence on all sciences. Rameau was not alone in accepting some of them hovering in the zeitgeist. All the strategies of Linnaeus expressed in his book Genera Plantarum and disseminated by Jean-Jacques Rousseau in France seem to be adopted by Rameau. These include the precise definition of the element of hierarchy of taxonomies by their morphology. It is exactly what distinguishes Rameau's hierarchy of chords from the arbitrary descriptions of figure-based teachers, including Johann David Heinichen. In order to establish a functioning hierarchy, a scientist must find the ways to determine the essential characteristics of each element and the points of its divergence from other elements. For Rameau, it was the morphology of the triad, the perfect chord, in its inner hierarchy of elements, the root, the third, and the fifth. This allowed Rameau to build a hierarchy: root position, first inversion, second inversion. Similar to Linnaeus, Rameau disregarded the arbitrary differences among chords used by figure-based tradition and introduced the abstract binomial definitions, referring to genera and species of chords. Rameau created a double hierarchy, that root position triad and inversion triad, and the primary triads and secondary triads. There is an interesting difference between the simple tree-like top-down hierarchies used in music theory before, for example, in Ars Nova rhythm theory. It's top-down hierarchy, rhythm, binary division, whole, half, quarter, and so forth, 8-note. Rameau's hierarchy is different, bottom-up. He did not emphasize it, but it's implied in his system. The chord, l'accord parfait, is the ultimate highest level achievement of this hierarchical system, which by default is bottom-up emergence type. I have done some research in this area, hierarchy as emergence. It means that the path up from tone interval to chord and to chord function is based upon irreversible and irreducible transformations. And in the result, we obtain new quality, quali novum. So the concept of hierarchy as emergence has been developing in the 19th century in British scientific and philosophical traditions, namely in the works of John Stuart Mill as homopathic and heteropathic causation. So the hierarchy that Rameau has built is very precious. It's the hierarchy of emergence. Then let's go, the idea of harmonic function. So I'd like to cut it a little bit shorter. Rameau introduced the idea of tonal harmonic function, which has been debated and rejected by Schenkerians, and I think that it is the most baneful and dangerous step taken in contemporary North American music theory. So, in the treatise Génération harmonique ou Traité de la musique théorique et pratique in 1737, Rameau introduced these three names, tonic, subdominant, and dominant. Hugo Riemann later formulated and formalized them in mathematical terms in his simplified harmony, vereinfachte Harmonie oder die Lehre von der tonalen Funktionen der Akkorde. Function, the conceptual presentation of which is y equals fx, or as dy/dx in Leibniz's first presentation in 1692, deals with the most advanced approach in mathematics. It is distanced from description of real objects. Instead of real numeric values, functions operate with variables. Musical expressions of the variables are tonique, sous-dominant, and dominant-tonique. Mathematically speaking, the y is dependent variable, the x is independent variable or argument of function, while f denotes the action over the independent variable. I'm just reiterating trivial mathematical formulations. Everybody knows them. Thus, in musical terms, y equals fx translates into tonique equals resolution of the dominant, where y is tonique, x is dominant, and f is the act of resolution. Why to call tonic, subdominant, and dominant variables? I'm using this analogy with variables, mathematical variables. Well, discovered by Rameau the phenomena of double employé, retaining the function of the in the substitution of primary triad with the chord a third below, and variable function of the scale step 4, which is the part of subdominant and the part of the dominant seventh chord, has led to the idea of substitution and alteration, which was introduced by Fétis. So, in a nutshell, that's what I wanted to show you, but I read through that already. In a nutshell, we have three variables, x, y, z. This DSD, CSD. And they can be stuffed with any real objects. So in general, our contemporary music theory, and especially mathematical aspect of it, you will see it in Dmitry Timoshko's presentation, deal with musical notes as objects. For some reason, neither Richard Cohn, nor Timoshko, nor David Lewin, the founding father of this transformational theory, used the idea of function. They've used the ideas of algebra. It's non-algebraic. They only use the idea of set or group, but this is the most primitive mathematical category. Mathematics is much more advanced than that. And moreover, these functions are not real objects. They are the actions that happen over these objects, which are inside each of these circles. My French colleague Jean-Pierre Bartoli mentions that tonal harmonic functions are inaudible. They're sous-entendu. So, well, you have to train them. You have to train the sensation of functional flow. Let's go to something else. The discovery of leading tone. Leading tone is number 5. Leading tone is an amazing category. It contains energy. Ernest Kurt, the philosopher, psychologist, Swiss music theorist, who lived at the same time with Schenker, wrote this in his famous book, The Crisis of Harmony and in Tristan, Romantic Harmony and its Crisis in Tristan. I quote, "In my theoretical work, I refer to it as a potential energy, also taking this expression freely based on the relation to physics. The conversion of kinetic to potential energy in chords is based largely, but not exclusively, on the increased energy states of so-called leading tones." So to continue with this analogy, Ernst Kurt suggests that leading tone is like electron. It's energy levels. See? Interesting. The idea of fundamental bass, that is the succession of chords, This is interesting. Another manifestation of hierarchy besides the chord system is Rameau's idea of fundamental bass, basso fondamentale. Again, his critics tried to pinch him for the unartistic quality of such bass. It goes by fourth and by fifth. It really is not pleasing. It doesn't walk. It's not linear, rugged, angular. Indeed, it's composed solely of roots of the triads and presents angular lines and lips. Il composait des sons graves et des accords primitifs, in words of Fétis. This objection, however, is as mundane and uninformed as all others. The fundamental bass is not here to create a smooth line. On the contrary, it shows the syntactic modes through which harmonic progression, no matter how richly embellished and filled with non-chord tones, passes with necessity. One tone of the fundamental bass leads to another with the force of tension created by complex cognitive mechanisms that are still to be studied. And here is my assistant Richard is here. We are talking about cognitive scientists owe us something. They have to explain to us what is functional tension. Why is it that one tone in the bass leads to another tone in the bass? We go scale step 5 resolves to scale step 1. What is happening? I feel it. I sense it. Everybody does. So we have to discuss this. We have to analyze it in terms of cognitive science and maybe medicine. Elizaveta, maybe medicine should help us. It's medical effect. And basso continuo. It's not always a good thing. It can be very muddy and illogical. So the effect of basso fondamentale is equivalent of newly discovered principles of grammar in natural languages. You know, at the same time, there was a reform, Port Royal reform, initiated by the King of France, because he could not understand diplomatic documents written in this horribly asyntactic French language. Have you read Blaise Pascal in original language? It's impossible because the order of words is completely random. So Antoine Arnaud and Pierre Nicole entitled their treatise La logique ou l'art de penser. You see that? Logic or the art of thinking. And they did it for a reason. They have created the precedent of ordered linguistic syntax, regulations and ordering of the words in the sentence that later Noam Chomsky called generative grammar. Hugo Riemann in his dissertation Musikalische Syntaxis talks about this. He relates fundamental bass and tonal functional cycle to poetic meter. He tries together harmonic function, metric distribution, and linguistic poetic structure, suggesting that concatenation of the fundamental sounds, Klange, results from a certain law of inertia or economy of imagination. We can add that syntactic cycle, tonic, subdominant, dominant, tonic, is very, very similar to subject, modal verb, predicate, and object in languages. This is true. There was a liaison connection between music and language. The German theorists call it Klangrede, musical speech, that gave birth to classical forms, to all music that we like today. Baroque, classical, romantic, this connection to, but it was a cliche from reform of the language. There was also, the last topic is corps sonore. The root of the concept goes back to Greek antiquity, to the very idea of union between music and sciences, mathemata. The opponents of Rameau accuse him in attempts to explain music in scientific terms. This critique misses the point. It should be directed at the disciples of Pythagoras. They were the scientists who connected music with mathematics. Is there anything wrong in the laws of music being the same as the laws of nature? There's a problem of being as such, philosophical problem of suggested by Heraclitus and Heidegger. It's a more serious topic. Current theorists reject the idea of connection between natural overtone series and harmony. Well, no good orchestra will sound without this phenomenon. The orchestra sounds because because there's natural overtone series and resonance. There will be no spectralist music because it is based on natural overtone series and manipulation. There will be no Pierre Boulez with his major composition Le Marteau sans Maître is written using multiplication of pitch intervals, which is pretty much Rameau. There will be no vocal resonance and there will be no Cremona violin. So the further we go into Rameau's conceptual world, more and more we will discover the reference to his current scientific ideas. More and more the picture that connects music to the knowledge of nature, albeit by times problematic, will open before our eyes. In this sense, Rameau is a pioneer of transdisciplinary strategy, a forerunner that was first to connect the theory of music with the sciences of modernity. Thank you very much.